Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Iron Man 2. It is set 6 months after the first Iron Man film, Tony Stark resisting the call from the US government to surrender the Iron Man suit, and at the same time competing with Sam Rockwell's character Hammer as Tony Stark is going through kind of an existential crisis because he realizes he is dying because of the plutonium he's using to power his suit and keep him alive from those metal shards entering his heart. So he is acting very erratically and crazy, and the government is becoming very suspicious of him and wondering if other people can build suits like the Iron Man suit. And then Mickey Rourke's character Ivan Vanko shows up, also known as Whiplash, to terrorize Tony Stark in Monaco when he drives a race car for some reason. Tony Stark and Stark Industries are put in a lot of doubt, and the government is kind of cracking down on them. And then Vanko and Sam Rockwell, who plays Hammer, team up, get an industry grant, and one-up him and become the cool weapons manufacturer. Iron Man 2 really isn't as good as the first Iron Man, and I think that's obvious to anyone. And I think the thing that separated Iron Man from a lot of comic book movies is that it's different. It's a character study. It's a personal film. You're really following a really small group of characters. I know a lot of people who don't really like the Marvel movies, who don't like superhero movies, but they liked Iron Man because it was different. It didn't feel like a superhero movie. I mean, it is a superhero movie, but it was more interested in getting to know Iron Man. Now, you couldn't obviously do that with Iron Man 2, and it's kind of almost half our fault as an audience to think that Iron Man 2 could be Iron Man, because it can't be Iron Man. The way they made Iron Man only works with the first film. You can't reintroduce Tony Stark. I think this film was kind of going to be flawed and not liked as much from the onset. However, it's also not as good. I'm guessing this is why Marvel hasn't asked back any of the directors of their original films to do the sequels for at least the solo film. I don't think Favreau was a good choice for Iron Man 2. He was a great choice for Iron Man. He's really good at introducing a character, but it seems like continuing on that story he's not as good at. When I look at Iron Man 2, it kind of reminds me of what a normal superhero movie is like. And so Iron Man 2 is almost like what Iron Man probably would have been if Iron Man wasn't such a unique film structurally and such a different superhero movie. Kind of like the typical sequel theory. Like everyone says, like Jaws 2 is like Jaws if you could see the shark more. There's a lot of sequels where it's unique take on its genre, and then they make a sequel and then make such a boring genre film. Iron Man, I think the theory in having Favreau come back and kind of try to do something similar was a flawed theory. So that's kind of why this movie, I think, kind of crumbles. It's not the worst superhero movie out there. In fact, of the recent Marvel movies, starting with Iron Man, of that continuity, I mean, I guess I might like Thor a little less, but I think the theory behind this one is the weakest of those films. They should have maybe switched directors. I don't have an idea of who they could have picked. Now, this isn't a terrible movie. It's a fun comic book movie. If you like comic books, you'll like it. It's disappointing to watch after Iron Man, and it's disappointing if you're a fan of Iron Man. Everything that Iron Man soars in, Iron Man 2 kind of just conforms it. This film is very crowded. It's too crowded. Iron Man 2 is really like the typical superhero sequel. You know, it's got 2 villains, it's got a ton of characters. It's like the Batman Returns kind of theory. Let's do it even bigger and badder. It's a typical Hollywood sequel. Mickey Rourke's character of Ivan Vanko, I don't really know very well. And my problem with it isn't his performance, it's just we don't really get to know him that well. And I think the 2 villain thing, it didn't really work very well. I wish they had more screen time. I feel like a lot of the times with movies, and a lot of times summer movies that aren't so great, this isn't a total failure, but it falls under this. It feels like a 4-hour movie cut down that makes like way less sense, and I don't really want a 4-hour cut of Iron Man 2, but I wish there was more time with Mickey Rourke's character, or that there was a centralized villain, because basically Mickey Rourke is kind of doing like a Khan character, like Wrath of Khan. That's a personal relationship you have to have with the villain. He needs to be the one villain. You can't have Khan and somebody else. And then their ultimate goal is to just do what Obadiah Stane did. I mean, the end battle sequence is them in a suit again. Iron Man fights somebody in a suit again. It's literally too much of a retread. And it tries to act like it's something more. You know, it tries to do kind of like the Skyfall idea, that it's very personal, he's a very personal villain. But were also doing the government stuff and the Hammer thing. It just, they needed to simplify it, and the Avengers stuff, I think, was a little overbearing. I don't think it was too much, but it was a little overbearing. The wall-to-wall pop music in it, I mean, there's no real score to it. I don't love the scores of the Marvel movies, but it definitely gives it a feel, and this makes it feel like more disposable Hollywood crap with like all the AC/DC music and all the pop music. It just didn't, I don't think it really worked for the movie. It didn't give it a real score. It made it more of a corporate opportunity. Screenwriters in Hollywood, when they do superhero movies, they're always like, no, we have to have a villain who wants to do the same powers that they have and mess with the powers. And like, I think that's one of the things I really liked about the Avengers versus a lot of these films that are always commenting on people's powers, is that I just want to see superheroes go on an adventure and fight villains. I don't really want to see them mess with their powers so much. That might be interesting 4 or 5 films in, but it just, doing it right away seems a little too soon. That's my problem with a lot of reboots and a lot of sequels. It's like, why are you taking all this on right now when I just want like more of a simpler movie? It's like, just this film's biggest problem is it's accomplishing way too much. The powers thing, it's such a bad cliche of the superhero genre, the film genre at least, because it's not reflecting what happens in the comic books. It's not really creative anymore. I just would like us not to mess with any comments on anyone's powers for like forever. And in the Avengers, they actually comment on how they have to make weapons to deal with these superheroes and supervillains, and they don't dwell on it, and it's actually, they make a good point with it. Whereas in all these movies, they're not making a good point. They're trying to pretend like it's a smartly written supervillain when it's just a cliche that's been done to fucking death. I don't know why so many screenwriters put that in there, and it gets a little dull. It's just a bad genre cliche that needs to be done with. Spider-Man 2 could do it well. That's about it. I think X-Men 2 commented on it very well, but I wish we just have superheroes fighting supervillains. I'd be perfectly happy with that. I still think this is a fun movie, and when I saw it this time, I was like, it's not as bad as I always thought it was, but it's just like the theory of it isn't there because they're just trying to make a big Hollywood sequel to a film that was kind of a little more personal, a little more independent, almost Altman-y, and then it's like big corporate Hollywood as the follow-up. This and Spider-Man 3 are 2 films that I think fell apart and like were kind of huge letdowns from the previous film. People liked them because they didn't feel necessarily corporate. They certainly were. I mean, I'm not an idiot. I get they were definitely corporate movies, but they felt more personal. You really related to these characters. They were well-told stories. And then you get this film that's just another crappy summer sequel blockbuster movie, and you're like, oh, I thought you were different. So if you have seen Iron Man 2 and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. I will have an Iron Man 3 review up soon. But in the meantime, you can check out my reviews for Iron Man, the Avengers, and all the Marvel movies, at least in this continuity, and many other Marvel movies in my Avengers playlist. So check that out, and hope to see you soon with my Iron Man 3 review. And thanks for watching. Genndy Tartakovsky actually did the storyboards for it, and you can really tell in the end action sequence when all those droids come down. Every time I watch that sequence, I can always tell Genndy Tartakovsky did it. I actually don't even like the action sequence that much, I just like the staging of it. Hoping Iron Man 3 is better.